Hello everyone, so my name is Arnaud Lauret. I'm a senior API architect at Natixis. It's a French banking group. Some may know me as the API Handyman. You can follow me on Twitter, read my blog. Well, to be honest, I did not publish much content lately on my blog because I was spending most of my free time writing a book called The Design of Web APIs, which is about the design of web APIs. Hopefully it's over now. I can get back to a normal life. The timer did not start. You can just start it. Yes. Okay, so a part of my job at Natixis is helping people. Just give me a second. Okay, helping people to design APIs. I'm working with different teams across different business lines on the creation and evolution of dozens of APIs. Mostly private ones. I work with total beginners, more experienced people, and everything between. In that context, I had to conduct quite a few API design reviews, and today, with the API Design Reviewers starter set, which is heavily inspired by Dungeons & Dragons rulebook, I would like to share with you a few things I've learned that I hope will help you to conduct design review, but also when designing APIs or building API governance. During Dungeons & Dragons games, the Dungeon Master, the one who creates the story and handles the rules, this guy may ask a player to make a persuasion check to see if they succeed to convince some non-player character. When you do API design reviews, you may have to convince people. A question that usually needs to be answered is, why do we need API design review? Even if it is said like, oh, great, is that yet another useless process? It's indeed a very good question. Indeed, why do we need to review API designs where designing APIs is so simple? We have API design guidelines who are skilled, experienced developers and functional experts. Well, let me tell you a story to answer that question. Not that what follows is purely fictitious and has never, ever happened in any of the company I've been working with. Okay, it may have happened, but not exactly like this. Let me introduce you to Donan, the designer, and Rina, the reviewer. Names have been changed. Donan is a level 2 API designer, and Rina is a multi-class character, which is both a level 23 API designer and a level 5 API design reviewer. I will now reenact an API design review that never happened. Greetings, Rina. Greetings, Donan. As you know, we need to add a post-send email operation to our API. This operation is so simple that we wonder what we need to review it. Well, you know, this is for the good of our kingdom and its people. We would like to ensure that all our APIs make sense, are free of design bugs, are extensible and user-friendly. We also take advantage of these reviews to enhance our guidelines and help people to grow their API design skills. Rest assured that I am not the API Design Inquisition. I'm here to help you. And this review will probably not take a long time, as you already sent me your API scroll. Great. So what do you think about it? From a pure form perspective, that looks quite good. You follow our guidelines almost perfectly. Names like sender or recipient are quite clear. Required data are defined. You use the HTTP protocol is OK. And you use our standard error responses. The only thing that you need to modify would be the send email path, because according to our guidelines, we only use nonce in a path. In this case, I would suggest a post email request that tells that you create an email. If that is not clear, we can go through our guidelines to explain that point. By Muradin, that's a good news. We'll do the modification and start coding. Wait, form is not all. Your API scroll did not contain any information about why and how this post-send email operation will be used. Can you tell me more? Oh, that's quite simple. When users modify their data on our mobile application, we need to modify their data to notify them that their data has been modified, for security. Okay, this looks like some low-level technical operation which will be called by your mobile backend, right? Not at all. Once the modify operation, it's hard to roleplay. Once the modify operation has been called by the mobile application called the new send email operation. So, if my understanding is correct, that means that the consumer is in charge of what seems to be purely internal security business logic, and that everyone getting access to this API can send an email to anyone on our company's behalf. By Moradin, you're right. I'm glad we did this review. I need to rethink my plan. Okay, the roleplay is ended. So this story is a good sample of why we need API design reviews. This is only a sample. What else could possibly go wrong when designing API? Well, almost everything. API designs can be inconsistent, non-conforming to guidelines, bugged, incomplete, non-user-friendly, unsecure, and may even not fulfill the real needs. These are the most common reasons why we need API design reviews, and API design reviewers aim to help designers avoid all these problems. This purely fictitious example gave us a glimpse of what happens during an API design review. Let's see more by discovering the 4 basic rules that should be followed when conducting an API design review. Rule number 1, in a D&D game, what is important is not saving the kingdom from some evil sorcerer. No. What is important is the story that the party will live and the action that we will need to do to achieve this legendary victory. An API design review is not a one-stop journey. It must follow a complete life cycle, like a story, in order to be efficient and fun. An ideal API design review starts with an early review where the people in charge of designing the API meets the reviewer to discuss about their needs and their plan to fulfill them. The objective is to ensure that the teams go into the right direction. For such early review, we don't need a detailed API design. What we need is an overview of the context, the needs, maybe some idea about the API operations that will be needed and how they will be used. In our send email use case, such an early review would have quickly showed that the direction taken was not a good one. After this review, the API is actually designed and its description and any documentation is sent to the reviewer for the code review. At this stage, the reviewer works alone. The objective is to go through all aspects of the API to spot possible errors and uncertainty. Such detailed analysis must never be done live. It requires concentration and time for thinking. The API design reviewers list all questions and remarks and send them to the API team in order to prepare the live review. Note that if everything is perfect, the review can end here. During the live review, reviewer and designer go through all questions and remarks and agree on modifications to do or not to do on the design. Once that is done, the API description is updated and resent to the API reviewer for a final check. The live review can sometimes be a simple email exchange if there are only obvious problems to fix and no need to discuss them. And the review can also end on the live review if the contract is live updated. Be warned that sometimes more than one code life cycle can be needed, and also always explain the review process. If you don't do that, you may never see the API team again after your first meeting because they could think that they have all what they need. Rule number 2, if you play D&D, you know the importance of exploration. A party must check every corner of a dungeon to be sure to find all treasures, but also traps. When you do a design review, and especially during the code review, you have to be the most exhaustive possible. Every aspect of the API must be scrutinized in order to be sure that everything is okay. You must ensure that the API makes sense for its users and is user-friendly. To do so, you must have a good view on the context, the targeted users, and the needs. It's mandatory to check if the API's purpose, its operation, the requested and provided data are actually the correct solution. You have to check at every level that everything makes sense for anyone willing to use the API. That includes operation goals, operation flows, naming types, formats, required and optional data in parameters, but also in response, errors, and even descriptions. You have to explore also every level, again, from operation to each property and everything in between in order to check that the API conforms to your guidelines. And you also have to check that every part of the API is consistent with all other parts. Always double check for security aspects. Do the API deal with sensitive data? What the API is allowed to do or access to is relevant for targeted consumers, how the API is secured is adapted to the context, using, for example, adequate OO flows. And do not forget if any limitation has been forgotten for the design. It could be because targeted users are on hostile network environment, and you may need paginations. They may have technical limitations, and there may be also technical or functional limitations on the implementation side that should be taken into account in the design. Rule number 3, social interaction play an important role in a D&D game. It's the same for API design review. During early review and live review, you will have to make the API creators talk a lot. You have to ask questions, make comments, and carefully listen to what they say. That will help you understand the context and the needs, to identify vocabulary, data types, concepts, processes. All this information are critical because you need them to evaluate if the design is accurate. Very important, when you make people talk, you may have to guide them to focus on the higher perspective. During early review, I've seen people starting by talking about get/this and retrieving data from some table without explaining the context. If it is the case, refrain them and ask them to explain the who's, the why's, and the how's from a functional perspective. And last rule, but not the least, you must adopt the right mindset to do API design reviews. If an API designer was a D&D character, its alignment would be neutral code. Let's see what it means. An API reviewer is supposed to explain and teach, absolutely not to shame without any arguments. Always explain your remarks by rephrasing your understanding of the needs or by reporting to guidelines or common practices or existing APIs. In order also to be able to do an accurate review, don't be too smart. Try to impersonate consumers who are not experts in the field of the API, even if you know it. Always trust the API team about their functional knowledge. It's not your API, but theirs. You're only here to give a hand. Last remark that you should carefully think about, because depending on your context, you may not want to do it my way. I believe that as an API design reviewer, you should avoid doing the police and block projects. Sometimes, for whatever reasons, the API team may not be able to follow your recommendations. Just explain the consequences and let them judge if that is a problem. Of course, there is balance to find in order to ensure an overall consistency in your company's APIs. D&D is a never-ending game, just like API design reviews, and you must be prepared to make that ongoing story as enjoyable as possible for everyone, including you. So here are 4 other rules that you should follow when you conduct many API design reviews. Rule number 1, proper equipment can mean the difference between life and death in a dungeon and when doing API design reviews, so you better fill your toolbox. First of all, write API design guidelines, which describes how APIs should be designed in your organizations. Without these guidelines, you can be sure that it will be really hard for you and all API designers to be consistent. Promote the use of machine-readable API description format. For REST API, the OpenAPI specification. For asynchronous API, the async API specifications. And by the way, that means that all types of APIs should be reviewed. Using machine-readable API description format, you can write programs that will lint your API to check if they match your guidelines. Not that such a linter alone cannot do the review. It's a great help, but you have to verify that from a functional perspective, everything is okay. So I started to use Stoplight Spectral to do some API linting on OpenAPI files, and I'm having quite good results. And I plan to provide lints as a service for all the API teams I'm working with. Note that some API designers may not be happy to write some YAML files. So try to find user-friendly design tools. You can give a try to Stoplight Studio, which is, in my opinion, the best options I've seen for now. I am not paid by Stoplight. They just made great tools. Rule number 2, our memory is not reliable and not easily shared. A good dungeon master records every player's action in order to use this information in later games. And as an API design reviewer, you must also record everything. Write down your reviews so you can share them with API designers or other reviewers you're working with. It will help to check that all problems have been fixed. It will help your analysis of evolutions of API you have already reviewed. I did not find any magic tools to do that, so I use a good old wiki. Record all important decisions and why you took them. It could be a local decision for a specific APIs or more global ones. The global decisions should be recorded in your guidelines. For example, of global decisions, how should we adapt our design and implementation when consumers are unable to make patch HTTP requests? Don't laugh. It happens to me a few weeks ago for people who want to call APIs from Salesforce. And finally, store all contracts in a contract repository. So for example, you can check if a new API built by your team is consistent with existing APIs or how these APIs evolve since the last reviews. Rule number 3, govern, but not too much. A good D&D dungeon masters know when to apply the rules strictly or loosely, just like a good API design reviewer. One of the objectives of making API design reviews is to ensure that APIs built by different teams are consistent. That makes them easier to use. So some people may think that could lead to the need of very strict rules, using very strict data schema. In my opinion, don't do that. It's up to you to, it's my opinion, so it's up to you to find the right governance level. Building a reviewers community could be a good thing, especially if the members are actual designers. It will help you to ensure consistency and build better guidelines. But community sometimes dreams with committee. API design reviews led by committees can be a real burden because committees tend to go into endless debates, lead to a too rigid and time-consuming governance. So in my opinion, a single and trained and trusted reviewer will do a better work. But again, do as you wish. Rule number 4, train and teach. Your job is not only reviewing API design. Your job is making people better at designing APIs. I already said that you can teach people during reviews by explaining your remarks and your questions, but you can do more. During early review, I check with the API team if they actually need help on the design. That way they can learn to design API with me. We also plan with my team to create an API design training course that people could do before doing API project. That way we can preemptively ensure that the design will be okay, and so we will have less work on the reviews. Is it the end already? Not yet. There is one last thing about reviews. Reviewers do not work alone. API creators have to actively participate to design reviews. Rule number 1, do not wait for the last minute before going into production, before contacting the API design reviewers. Reviewers are not here to give you a badge to go into production. If you think that, do not contact them, but be ready to face the consequences. If it's quite simple to fix an API design before it has been implemented, it may be far more complicated to change anything once everything has been developed or was put into production. And fixing bad design may even need to totally rethink a solution's architecture. Bad design may also have serious consequences for your organizations. Nobody may want to use your terrible APIs, but things can even be worse if security is involved. Remember the sent email use case. So I repeat, reviewers are here to help you. The sooner you contact them, the better. Rule number 2, on each step of the API design review, participants must be prepared. API design reviewers will ask questions, they need to be answered, so the participants, whoever they are, must be able to answer them all. That means that a developer, a business analyst, a product owner, and even possible consumers may be involved in the process. If you provide documentation, please provide user-friendly documentation, simple diagrams explaining API code flows. You can use Plunder, for example, but awfully long wiki pages describing every business rules are not needed. For the code review, please provide a fully documented API contract using the relevant API description formats. And in order to avoid everyone losing their time, please pre-check the interface contract using your guidelines or a linter provided by reviewers. And finally, read the code reviews to prepare answers and fix what can be fixed before the live review. Rule number 3, the last one, API creators like reviewers must adopt the right mindset. So don't take it personally. Reviewers are here to help you. They may ask many questions, they may challenge you, but it's for your API's good. On your side, never hesitate to challenge and ask questions to the API design reviewers. As a reviewer, I have learned a lot by being challenged by designers. And one last thing, never hesitate to propose evolutions of guidelines based on your needs. Guidelines are made for you, by you. And we have gone all through the API design reviewer starter set. I can breathe. I really hope it will help you. If you should remember just one thing, please remember that API design reviews make everyone grows, API design reviewers, and also API designers. Thank you.